And I remember this was although I was dependent on alcohol, literally in the past, I have not done any other drugs. I have not, I think I have, I've never smoked as I smoke. I may have tried one or two puffs, but I really never smoked as a smoker. I never took any other narcotic. In fact, I'm so very happy to say I have not taken any hard drugs. I only have experiences altering my state of consciousness with few psychedelic substances, which are also nature or come from nature, not synthetic substances. So I didn't really have much of an experience to what is altered state of consciousness, what can I experience beyond me. And this is the reason why I'm also taking this session really slow and go step by step and want to tell you a lot of stories. The reason being that what I thought potentially an altered state of consciousness to what I experienced, the gap is such that I already know that I cannot do the justice to the stories that I'm going to tell you. I already know I cannot fully, comprehensively explain in detail my experiences. It's because they were too abstract. The words were too powerful for those, the words were too small for those experiences. So please allow me to share this experience with you. So as I was going into this deep psychedelic state, I have this very deep urge to see myself in the mirror. See myself in the mirror. I haven't seen any colors yet. I haven't seen much yet, but I can already feel that there's a difference in my body. Something has altered already physiologically, and there's this urge for me to see myself. So I go to this really so I was doing this experience in a five-star hotel because I wanted to have a really comfortable space for me and an experience that I can feel a safety at the same time, abundance. So that was very important to me. So I go into this really wonderful bathroom, absolutely very clean and absolutely very really beautiful marbles, really wonderful. So I can sit wherever I want on the floor and I can spend some time in front of the mirror. So as I was doing that, and I was naked myself, I was not wearing any clothes for this specific procedure. I want to see myself fully. So I was sitting in front of the mirror and I was observing myself. And as I was observing myself, the first instinct I got was as if I'm very old, not old like 30 years, not like 40 years, not like 100 years, but I felt that I am something of ancient. I felt that this nothing is really new. I've had a feeling of knowing. I had a feeling of groundedness and I had a feeling of age in a very positive way. It was a little bit unsettling to feel like that. And then as I continued to watch myself, I got this, it's not a visual representation, but more like a sensational representation where I started to feel as if I'm an old mountain with a lot of moss, a lot of humidity, a lot of water, a lot of insects, a lot of butterflies, a lot of birds, a lot of little animals running around. I felt like I contained that all within myself. I had that knowing of all that possibility. And then I started to focus more on my visual experience. And as I was bringing my face closer to the mirror and looking back at myself, I started seeing something that I can't necessarily explain except for this little example. Now, you know that there was a trend few years ago that you open one of your apps and then you look at yourself through the front-facing camera and you see a dog with the tongue hanging out or something on the face. You see that you can have different filters to make you look different in the phone. And you know it's only in the phone. It's not really there in your face. This experience was very similar. The closer I became to the mirror, what I saw was what you're seeing here. Not exactly, but the idea is the same. Idea is similar. I could see that my body somehow consisted of this recycled material. Some of it felt like tiger teeth. Some of it felt like the feathers of a swan. Some of it felt like flower petals. Some of it felt like the um, the feather of the crow. It was such an experience. And for a moment, I was in front of this. And since because altered state of consciousness doesn't necessarily allow you to make so much sense in the normal cognitive sense, normal here meaning sober state, in this state of thinking, I was trying to make meaning out of this experience. And after going through that, I felt it's time for me to now lay down and relax. So I just did that. And as I was doing that, there was this magnificent opening that happened within me. The opening was that I thought that I loved nature. I thought that I am someone who admired nature. And I also had a part to me that I strongly believed that I'm very strongly human focused, that I'm very interested in people, that I'm very interested in co-creating, collaborating, working together with people. And this opening, however, started to make me experience the entire universe as if it was within me, as if my body had been recycled over and over and over again. Although when those recycling was going on, I was not Fernando, my sense of self was not Fernando, I was able to derive some wisdom, some knowledge, not as Fernando, but as a universal being. And at that poor moment, Fernando was the least important thing, frankly speaking. I could say the experience a bit like this. I felt like I'm part of everything, everyone, every plant, every being, every ocean, every planet, every moon. And at the same time, I also felt like I am nothing. So please forgive me if I don't make much sense now. Like I said at the beginning, it's a very difficult experience to express. The reason is because when we explain our day-to-day experiences, we talk about the baseline state of consciousness, the sober state of consciousness. And that is a shared experience among all of us so that we all can resonate. At the same time, however, this experience was something more energetic, more internal, more authentic, something that had no words to it. I'm also not trying to prove anything. That's not my that's not my intention of sharing the story. But my intention of the story is this. So after this integration process, after learning, after going through that very powerful experience, during which we had no thinking about smoking, during which I had no thinking about the anxiety I was suffering, the depression that I was suffering, I felt an opening. When I felt that I am everything, that I'm connect. When I say I'm everything, what I mean by here is that I carry the essence of everything. I have experienced the essence of everything, possibly. Not in an egoistic way that I am everything, not in that sense. It's more of a grounding, it's more humbling sense that I'm part of everything. There's no need for division. The moment if I am sharing this message with you in the sense that I'm everything, I'm everything. If I say that, you notice that my sense of self comes from a place of egoistic. But here, the feeling was more grounding, more of humbling feeling. So I experienced this magnificent altered state of consciousness. And I think usually you may have heard the saying, my mind was blown, and sometimes people say quite literally, and we know that's really not possible. But I just kind of feel safe to say I had my mind blown quite literally in a very different way, not blown physically, but truly energetically. Now, in the upcoming sessions, I'm going to share with you, actually, my mind actually quite literally was blown physiologically. It was quite like neurochemicals, the way how neurochemicals reacted, operated, worked within my body was quite an explosion. So I'm going to talk about that later on. Now, coming back, I remember waking up the next day. So usually, if I'm to go to the gym, if I'm going to the swimming pool, all I need to do is press a button in my building. All that's I just have to take an elevator either down or up. It's as simple as that. But getting myself to be able to go press that button of the elevator is not easy at all, was not easy at all to do what I really love to do. What really meant for me to do for my vitality, I wasn't. The next day I woke up, I felt this natural desire to jump into the swimming pool, get to the gym, come back and get started working. Quite fascinating. And I reminded myself, well, you did the psychedelic ceremony yesterday. Usually the medicine could stay within your body for about actively for about 24 hours. And then it also could last in very small amounts for the next 4 days. And then afterwards it's gone. So I thought, makes sense. Maybe there's more psilocybin in my body still. So this is happening. That's great. I was very happy. Went. Second day, third day, fourth day, same. Fifth day, sixth day, and the seventh day, I just got out of bed and I sat down and I thought, why is this happening on the seventh day after this treatment? And then I stood up and quite literally broke down on my knees, started sobbing. That was the day I realized that entire 7 days, my mind did not cross alcohol. Sometimes there are days that I wake up. There used to be days that I'm very honest. I want to share the truth with you from the bottom of my heart. I'm not afraid anymore. I would wake up in the morning and I have had at 12 midnight, 1 a.m. the night before or the morning before or the same morning, I would wake up and I would feel not hangover. You know that when you drink alcohol for a very long time, our body adjusts. I no longer get hangover, but I get some kind of a haziness, dizziness. And I'm guilty to say that little hair of the dog, like a tiny small shot of vodka or shot of wine will reset you in the morning. Imagine how dangerous it will be. So I would wake up some mornings before this experience and think about what am I going to drink this evening? Oh, I have great new bottles of vodka. I'm going to open that today. I'm going to call that friend and we're going to have a drink. This is my habitual thinking, very honestly. And when I haven't thought about alcohol being that day in, day out, and then all of a sudden, when you don't think about alcohol for 7 days, I would you would imagine the kind of shock that created in me. And with that shock, there came another wave of shock, which is I realized for the very first time in my life, very, very from the bottom of my heart, I realized all my life I have been depressed. I have been in deep anxiety. I have been suffering from bipolar disorder. And all of this was comorbid, if not interacting with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Having grown up with a mother who was unstable mentally and having experienced several, having now I can diagnose her. I mean, she's healed, she's resilient, she's a faith healer, she's doing very well. She inspires me every single day because she went through this protocol, this beautiful medicine journeys herself, and me and my sister, we accompanied my mom and dad through that journey, and they are very deeply healed. They're absolutely happy. Coming back to my experience, that was the very first day I learned this. I learned that this is how it feels to be mentally, emotionally healthy. At the early 30s, when I realized that all my life I have been crippling with anxiety, worry, fear, although I somehow managed to run a business, somehow managed to get myself to show up, I was showing up as if there were so many chains that kept me bound, that slowed me down. And that day, I realized this is how it must feel to be mentally, emotionally healthy. And I remember sitting there for many minutes and sobbing. And the interesting thing is that if you notice that what I experienced during the psychedelic integration experience, the treatment, nothing to do with alcohol, nothing to do with my mother, nothing to do with the traumatic experiences I myself have been through life and all that anxiety, worry, depression, bipolar, CPTSD symptoms that I was experiencing. It had nothing to do any of that. It had this beautiful picture in front of me, like an old mountain, ancient mountain, with the knowing that I'm connected to everything, that I'm connected to everyone. And in science, we call it spontaneous healing. When we look at healing in psychedelic integration, there are many different types of healing. Some type of healing is cognitive. Some type of healing is physiological. For an example, we help. So myself as a psychotherapist, psychedelic integration therapist, one of the things that I do with my clients is I help them to find out where is this coming from? Where might it be related to? And when that connection is made, healing is possible sometimes. And sometimes it requires further intervention. Let's say you are aware that we hold trauma in our body. To be very specific, there are certain types of tissues in our body that we hold trauma, right? So these tissues, for an example, we can work by pressing, tapping, adjusting, and help us to remove trauma. So intervention, deliberate intervention. So during psychedelic integration protocols, we can do those things. Cognitive healing, body-focused healing, we call somatic healing, somatic body, soma, somatic healing. But this type of healing, spontaneous healing, is something that you have no way of explaining how it happened. And one client after one client after one client, I experience the same. People find resolutions, recalibration, realignment spontaneously without even making an effort. Not always, but it is very possible. Now that we are in a space of exploration and you potentially becoming comfortable with hearing stories, I want to share with you one more psychedelic, one of my experiences, and I'll tell you why it is so significant to me. This is a different session, a therapeutic session. So I take the psychedelic medicine, I lay down on the bed, and all sensory is now covered. I am kind of going within myself. The first instance of the experience, I feel as if I am in this image that you see. It's not necessarily exactly what I saw, but this is the only image that I could find to share with you my feeling at the moment. I felt like I was placed in the middle of a flower, like a little insect, maybe, like a little bee. I was placed in the middle of a flower, right in the center of it. And then there were other petals, and then there were these other parts of the flower that was covering me in a way that feels so relaxed and so welcomed, so nurtured, so cared for. And at the same time, this experience felt very fragile. It felt so very fragile. I felt the fragility of myself. I felt the fragility of life. I felt the fragility of experience. I felt the rarity of me experiencing Fernando, the rarity of consciousness itself. And I must say, it was a sacred feeling. I'm unsure, sacred, what it means to you. It was a feeling that so deeply grounded me. It's a feeling that set me so reverent. It made me feel not worry about anything, just so relaxed. It's almost counterintuitive. On one side, I felt the fragility of the experience. Experience is the possibility of consciousness. And on the other hand side, I felt deeply, strongly grounded and very solid. And then something happened, quite intense and quite interesting. This experience has no, this experience has no um, tangible words or an experience that I can tell you. but I felt like being a little child. I felt like I am in the hands of my mother, but there was no mother at the time. There was like a universal motherly feeling. And this motherly feeling was different from my mother because my mother would always expect something from me naturally. But this motherly, nurturing, caring feeling had no expectations from me. That was another moment of experiencing love in a way, like childlike self, experiencing love for the first time with no attachment to it. So, in other words, very often we want to believe that we unconditionally love in certain relationships. But very often, at least myself, if I speak for myself, I didn't really know what unconditional love meant. I thought unconditional love was my mom loving me or me loving my sister. I think to a great extent, in many ways, they are nearing the border of unconditional. But after I went through this experience, I realized there's such thing as unconditional love. And it's a kind of love that I will struggle to explain, which I knew before I joined this session today. So I felt like I was in this toys or some kind of really childlike environment. The kind of like a feeling of I remember as a child, I remember my grandmom would come to visit me and she would be the one to bring me that that toy car. She would be the one to bring me uh, that video game those days that we put a cartridge, and then we connect it to the TV and we play the game. Or we have a gun that we shoot. I remember my grandmom was the one who used to bring me these gifts when I was a child. Such fond uh, memories of so much fond. And in this experience, my grandmom wasn't there. There weren't toys as such, but I felt an excitement as if I accessed all the toys that's available to me. In other words, all the abundance, all the love in a way. The story doesn't end here. What happened next is even more fascinating. Now imagine yourself being falling in very slowly, comfortably, falling into a very thick, very solid, very grounded blanket. And that this blanket has the ability to absorb you, take the shape of you, and acknowledge you, accept you, take you in. That happened. It was orange color for some reason, I remember still vividly. For the perception, kind of orange. It took me in. It took me in, it wrapped me, and this love I felt magnified. It almost like I became that love. I became that love. And as I was experiencing that, I tried to recall, who am I? I asked myself, who am I? And guess what? I could not remember. I could not remember who I was, where I was, what I was doing. I simply had no sense of self. I simply had no memory of Fernando for maybe few seconds, I don't know, maybe a few minutes, I don't know, because time dilates during these experiences, altered states of consciousness. Because right now, our consciousness is experiencing time in a specific way. But when the consciousness is altered, the time changes as well. So I don't know how long I was in the experience, but it was like a wave. I went into the wave and then I could see emerging through remembering. You have heard the saying that when someone dies, that their entire life flashes in front of them. I can't say that's what happened, but an essence like that. I almost instantly knew who I was. It's almost like my entire life in 1 millisecond splashed in front of my eyes. I had a deep awareness of my sense of self is Fernando. In this life, I am Fernando. Everything that I do as Fernando. I am Fernando. I had this awareness at once in a millisecond. Was it surprising? Was it? It was just a neutral experience. Right now, when I think about it, it's interesting. But at that moment, it was a neutral experience. And then what happens next is to go back into that wave again. And this time, when I went into the wave, I once again asked myself, who am I? The last thing that appeared to me is Fernando. I had no sense of self. I had no idea who I was. But the kind of profound peace I experienced in my life, the profound peace I experienced not having a sense of self. We often say things like, I want to live forever. I want to be here forever. I want to elongate my life as long as possible. Great, amazing. The sense of self, the ego is very strongly trying to hold on to who we are. But during that experience, the reality diluted in a way that I did not no longer worry about who Fernando was. It was such a calm, neutral, peaceful feeling that I cannot explain in words. Such peace not to be Fernando. And then I came out of that experience after a while. There were many other things happening there. After I came out of that experience, one of the very first things I did was, one of the very first things I did was sitting down on the floor and literally hugging myself very strongly and crying my eyes out and saying, thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Fernando, for bringing me here. Thank you for going through all the challenges. Thank you for enduring all the difficulties in life. And then it flooded with a deep gratitude that this is possible, that this life is possible. And it meant so much to me. And when I started the integration process, surprisingly, as I started talking about my experience, the first thing I said is that I am not afraid to die. I am absolutely not afraid to die. And then I remember myself saying, tapping into my body, experiencing my body sensation, and telling myself, I can't be sure. I can't give you direct evidence, but I believe during the psychedelic experience, there was a simulation of death. I strongly believe that I experienced death through psychedelic integration. And I found out that death is the most peaceful experience. It's so much easier than living. There's once you pass that threshold of sense of self, ego, you emerge in a place that worry doesn't exist anymore. Fernando doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, no sense of self exists anymore. Therefore, no ego anymore. When there's no ego, when I'm not attaching myself to a sense of self, I'm in utter peace, I found out. So I found out, in a way, I'm saying this to myself. I found out how to die. I experienced how to die. And I have been in few dangerous situations. So interestingly, few dangerous situations, like once I was on a boat in the middle of a bit of a bad weather, and the boat is also speeding very well, and it was just kind of jumping like 10 feet up above the water. I remember it being one of those moments you would think that I might die right now. At that time, this was a few years ago, I quite literally thought I might die before I reach the island that I was visiting with my partner. And in that moment, this experience somehow just popped up. And I remember immediately, oh, dying is not difficult. It's about surrendering. It's about letting go of who Fernando is. And guess what? I stepped out of that experience, and this worry, this fear of death, fear of not being able to achieve, not being able to have full vitality, not being able to do things that I love to do, like running this session, they all disappeared. Well, I worry. I have fear. I am anxious sometimes as a human being. But that experience was so significant in my life. The kind of CPTSD I was carrying, the anxiety I was carrying, just washed away, just like that. It also gave me this massive perspective of existential reality to really know who I am. I remember as a little child, I would ask weird questions from my mother. my mother says that I used to ask, Mom, how do the nails come out of the finger? What is inside? Is there like a machine? How is it hard? Why is it not hard here? I would ask questions like that. I used to ask existential questions all my life. And it had been quite a burden for me all my life. I am that kind of thinker who will sit in the corner and start thinking, how is this possible? How is universe possible? I'm sure you resonate with me in some ways. And guess what? After this experience, did my questions, were my questions answered? No. But were my questions answered? Yes. Why? Because I no longer needed to ponder upon what are we doing here? What am I doing here? Who am I here? I don't know for sure to tell. That's why we are here. And this is who I am. I still can't say that. But there was a great deal of reassurance. There was a great deal of knowing of something that settled me. And that just made me realize I don't even have to ask those questions. You're just here to be in a way that you don't no long, you do not have to have a expectation from you. Like for an example, people very often say, we are here to learn. Every difficult experience teaches us. I see that. I understand that. And I thought for a moment before these experiences that I, as a spiritual being, is on this planet to learn. And after that experience, I realized, oh, I'm not necessarily here to learn anything in that kind of like a learning a lesson sense. Oh, I can admire, appreciate my learnings, the worldly learnings. That can be great if I want to learn, but no expectation for me to learn anything. No expectation me to feel pain or pleasure. Expectation for me to just be. And that day, I concluded the curiosity I had about existential realities. There's a great deal of knowing in me who I am, what I'm doing, what this universe is about. But that's my own knowing. If you ask me explain it, I wouldn't know how to explain it. And I also have no desire to explain to you what that reality that I have come across. I believe it's rather most amazing when you find it yourself. So I was talking a lot about sense of self. I've mentioned the word ego several times. Can we pinpoint where our ego is in our body? Can we pinpoint where our sense of self? The good news is yes, we can. So for an example, when we do self-referential thinking, when we think about ourselves, our world, what we want to do, my sense of self, my identity, my associations, and then if we check our brain under a MRI machine, we see that there are specific places that become activated. And some of them are the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex. You don't need to know any of these names, but just to make some references. These different regions working together collectively create your sense of self, which I believe myself as Fernando. So what I know about me as Fernando is held in these places. And when those places are active, I'm aware of myself. And these areas become less active if I'm driving, if I'm dancing, if I'm doing this session, for an example. When I'm not focusing on myself, these areas become less active and other cortices become more active. So by experiencing that, we know through many scientific research, which I will continue to unfold, that we have a specific part in our brain that is mostly responsible for sense of self. And why am I saying this? Earlier, I mentioned psilocybin, the magic mushrooms. I mentioned the word psilocybin. Psilocybin is a component, psychoactive component, which is the pro-drug, which means once you ingest psilocybin, it breaks down to become psilocin. Psilocin is actually the psychoactive compound. In fact, let's say if you ate dried or fresh mushroom, psilocybin, the right dosage, you do not need to prepare it in any way. As far as it's clean, you digest it. Once you start digesting, this phosphate group you see in the psilocybin molecule, you don't need to know much details, but if you're curious, if you are maybe a psychotherapist, you're a psychiatrist, or if you are in science, this might be useful for you. So when you look at the psilocybin molecule, psilocybin actually stands for 4-phosphoryloxy N-dimethyltryptamine. Now, the 4-phosphoryloxy component is what you see over here, the the phosphate group. So once we ingest and digest it, this the amino acids and the digestive hormones in our body breaks it down, removes this phosphate group from the psilocybin molecule, so it becomes psilocin. Psilocin stands for 4-hydroxy N-dimethyltryptamine. So from phosphoryloxy, it became hydroxy, which means that the phosphate group was removed. The psilocybin became the active compound now that is going to interact with the body. Now, you know what is fascinating? This molecule looks very, very similar to the serotonin molecule, which is a neurochemical that is in our body. When we feel regulated, when we feel peaceful, when we feel grounded, the serotonin is naturally being released into our body from within our neurons. And they connect with serotonin receptors. Psilocin, when it's flushed through the body, now can connect with the serotonin molecules as if they were made for each other. Because if you notice, this hydroxy component is a little bit different in the serotonin molecule. It's just the placement of it. It's the fourth placement within the psilocin molecule that is a little bit different in comparison to serotonin. Otherwise, they are almost identical molecules. Something that comes out of the cow's dung, once digested, become something that is so powerful, that is so important to our body, which is our regulatory neurochemical, access our regulatory neurochemical, which is serotonin. So in other words, psilocin acts very similar to serotonin, except that we can explain a lot about serotonin, but psilocin, we cannot explain all the possibilities that it enables us. Now, remember, we looked at the brain earlier, and the brain has many different components responsible for doing different things like balance, language, seeing, light, taste, and so on. Imagine these different colors are responsible for those different things, different cortices. Now look at this diagram. The things that you see around the, the circle are those cortices. And the connection between these different colors is the connection, number of connections. The A diagram represents the number of connections that are available during a state like this, sober state, baseline state. And however, when we consume psilocybin, and then when they interact with our body, serotonin receptors, something fascinating happens, which is the default mode network reduces its functions. It reduces the function of sense of self. Remember earlier I told you, I experienced some kind of a death. Sense of self as Fernando wasn't present. So then you are starting to see the connection. Because psilocin enabled me, my body, my brain particularly, my default mode network particularly, to reduce its functions. So I myself within my own body couldn't find sense of Fernando. But at that time, something much larger happened, which is myself being connected to all the cortices of my brain in a way that is impossible, not possible for me to connect in my normal sober state. So there you are. Once when we release the sense of self, we end up connecting to ourselves like never before, several hundred times. You can see all these connections, all the little. This is a scientifically accurate MRI infographic representation so that you understand that the number of connections increase in the brain. More number of connections in the brain mean heightened neural plasticity. What is neural plasticity? Our ability to reorganize, reprocess, arrange, organize our brain, our nervous system. That means more memory, more connections, more understanding, deeper realizations, and so on. Why? Because your brain is hyperconnected at that moment. So you are starting to recognize how this little fungi that comes out of cow dung enables such a massive possibility, which can enable us to temporarily reduce sense of self. To me, it's a little bit like this. So we are coming to the end of this lecture. So I would like to conclude this sharing by saying like this. When I was when I was dependent on alcohol, I am dependent on alcohol because there are specific nervous uh, connections, the nervous system connections, networks that are already existing in my body, which is the default mode of operating. They're almost like snow paths. When you climb a snow mountain, you will stick to the paths that are already there. You will not explore the snow into unexplored areas. The reason being here, in this case, safety and also potentially efficiency. And our brain is a bit like that. The brain prefers to use those pre-existing neural connections when they do things, when it does things. Why? Because our focus is survival. If we want to survive in this, I mean, not literal survival in a sense that we are in danger, but we as human beings, we as a being living in this hostile environment, there are mechanisms, unconscious mechanisms, trying to protect us all the time. The energy usually focuses there because safety is the most important thing. So any other habitual thing like drinking alcohol, talking to someone, behaving in a relationship, doing things usually are conducted by those pre-existing connections already. So that means we are molded, we are conditioned, we are traumatized in a way that we behave in a specific way that we are molded into. So my mold was dependency on alcohol so that I can put myself to sleep. But what psychedelic did to me was like the new snow, like the falling of the new snow. I could relook at my entire mind like in a mountain and decide this path no longer serves me. But maybe this path could be valuable for me, cultivating new behavior like going to the gym, not wanting to drink alcohol anymore, and so on. So it's almost like the new snowfall. Once we go through a powerful therapeutic psychedelic experience, it enables you to experience altered states of consciousness in abstract ways that you might struggle with words to express. But the kind of healing, the kind of possibilities that it enables, you also will struggle with when you want to express themselves because they can be sometimes spontaneous. So the last two slides. So do we have enough research data? Do we know enough information to confirm this beyond Fernando's experiences? Because you should not just directly rely on just the information and the stories I tell you. I know that your scientific minds are wondering, what does the research say, Fernando? I want to know that. Okay, here it is. So according to John Hopkins Center for Psychedelics and Consciousness Research, when we look at when we looked at people who have been suffering treatment resistant depression all along their life, 70% of them after one psilocybin session found clinically significant improvement, and 50% of them remission to full baseline health. And those people who were in cancer study with anxiety, 80% of them reduced clinical anxiety. 67, about 70% of the people said either it was their most spiritually meaningful experience in their life or the most meaningful experience in their life. I'll talk about that in a minute with this. So depression, anxiety, those are not the kind of category potentially you are in. Those are people who are experiencing mental emotional disorders or challenges. But how about the healthy adults? The healthy adults who undertook just one psilocybin treatment, one session, mentioned that 50% more, most uh, personally meaningful experience. Now, what is the most personally meaningful experience? We must ask that. So when we ask these people, what are some similar experiences that you would put in the same category as most meaningful experiences? They said things like, when my parent died, that was a significant experience. When my child was born, that was a significant experience. The day I got married, that was a significant. And I count this first psychedelic integration experience as equally powerful, if not more. And for me, if you ask, the most powerful thing that I think I experience in world is being able to love those people that I love the most, that I don't think is comparable with any experience. But the second most powerful experience I ever had is my psychedelic experience, which is the one enabled me to be able to really love my people in my life so much more. Of course. So the 80% to 90% of the people say that their relationships improved, their mental health improved, their emotions improved, their relationships calibrated, and so on. So we are starting to recognize that there is enough research data for us to comprehend and understand, although altered states of consciousness experiences may be abstract, the results are not necessarily abstract as such. There's tangible clinical research, clinical data that is out there, which supports the powerful possibilities of psychedelics, in this case, altered state of consciousness. So I'm ending this session with this one. Um, very beautiful quote by one of my teachers, Roland Griffiths, unfortunately, who passed away recently. He said, I've come to think of meditation and psilocybin have been complementary processes for investigation of the nature of mind. And in fact, neuroimaging studies show that they both produce similar changes in the brain regions related to sense of self. And he continues to explain that, simplify that. He says, well, if meditation represents the true cause of the investigation of the mind, psilocybin surely represents the crash course. I think it makes sense to you, but I'd like to simplify it one more step. Those individuals, those who have been meditating for more than 25, 30 years, which we call professional meditators, after they have had such long meditation experiences, certain altered states of consciousness experience, they go through psilocybin experience and they come back and report and say that they couldn't have imagined enabling the possibility of psychedelic experiences through the meditations that they have been experiencing. So it truly appears to be the crash course for the investigation of the mind. All right, so with that, our next session, I'm going to tell you more stories, but at the same time, I'm going to dive deeper into scientific research. I'm going to share with you in our next session, once you consume psilocybin, what happens in your nervous system? Where is the serotonin molecules are? What part of the nervous system is affected? How does it happen? And what does that mean? And so on. So we'll discuss how altered states enable transformation in our next session on the 23rd March. So with that, thank you so very much for joining me for this lecture today. If you have shared any questions, I'm happy to look at them and answer and be here for a few more minutes. And if you would like to obtain the certification, I believe I need to share the link with you now. So please give me a second. So while you're sending your questions, I would like to share with you the link for the certification if you're interested. Okay, so here we go. So colleagues, we have already passed the time that's allocated for this session. Nevertheless, if any of you would like to share an insight, you're most very welcome to share if you'd like to. I also want to mention that I'm also doing another lecture series on comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency framework. If you're interested, please let us know. It's also complimentary basis, so you're very welcome to join. And I think attending these two lecture series hand in hand, parallelly, also would be extremely valuable because when we operate as human beings, sometimes we have forgotten the amount of trauma that we are part of, how we operate as a result of trauma, as an outcome of trauma. May not be trauma within this life for you, but it also immediately is impacted by your ancestors' trauma, your parents, your grandparents, and so on. And psychedelic medicine enables a deeper healing, including that kind of traumatic healing, which also can be related to even epigenetics, which can be related to ancestral trauma as well. Therefore, joining both of them together would be also valuable. So with that, I thank all of you, and let me see if there's any question. Okay, Julian, you have a question. I think it's a bit technical, so we will address that in the future. Yes. So, Julian, your thought process is accurate. I will be more pragmatic when we get to this, especially during the trauma-informed component. I'm going to discuss how fascia holds, quite literally, the technicalities of how fascia holds trauma, and look forward to sharing that in the future. There's some insights. So I appreciate all of that. With that, I send all of you love and light, colleagues and friends, and look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you.